Apple Knocker Radio.
All right, greetings, friends. In Sitting with Maurice, we discuss ideas and concepts shared by Dr. Maurice Nicole in his psychological commentaries on the teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. For today's discussion, we're going to be talking about digestion. Kind of an odd thing to come up in such a series, one may say, but it is not so odd once we come to understand what Nicole meant by digestion. And so in defining digestion, he calls it simply transformation. Though I would like to add that upon reading his passages on this idea and upon thinking about it a great deal myself, I would personally expand that definition to the internal transformation and integration of raw substance into functional energy. Now, that is not imposing my ideas on Nicole's ideas. I believe that is a more clear definition of Nicole's own ideas. And so, when we're talking about digestion right now, we're talking about transformation, or, as I said, the internal transformation and integration of raw substance into functional energy. Now, Nicole, when he's talking about this, he likens human beings to three-storied factories, and each story of that factory takes in a different kind of fuel. Right? Yeah, food, air, and impressions. We'll stick with food, and every one of these can undergo a digestive process. Well, two of them do undergo a digestive process. The third one, which will be the main meat of this discussion, no pun intended with the meat thing there, is impressions. But first, to understand what he means by the digestion of impressions, we should refer to the simplest encounter that we normally have with digestion, which is our food. So we consume food, our body processes it into energy, nutrients, minerals, etc., that our body can then use as fuel. Well, Nicole says that the same thing happens with our impressions. And when he says impressions, it's a term that he uses frequently throughout his writing. And by it, he means simply the experiences of life, the things that happen to us on a day-to-day basis. Now, even though that concept obviously is simple and easy to understand, the depth of it is worth contemplation. And it's a big part of Nicole's writing because for Nicole, and obviously most of this expands to the fourth way in general, from including Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, Bennett, all of them. But I'm going to try to stick it to just saying Nicole because we're talking about Nicole's books here. And Nicole takes great pains to try to get people to understand that the things that happen to us and our experiences to the things that happen to us are not the same thing. And that may seem like a trivial distinction, but it is absolutely not. To understand it is to understand why working on oneself and improving oneself psychologically and spiritually is so important. And that's also something to quickly add. When Nicole is talking about psychology, the title of the book is Psychological Commentaries. The idea of psychology comes up. The literal word psychology comes up often. But it's important to remember that when Nicole was talking about psychology, it's not quite the way that most of us would conceptualize of it today, because there was a definite spiritual function to it. It wasn't pure materialist psychology, though one of the things that I love about Nicole's work and the fourth way in general is that much, if not all, much of the majority of the tools and teachings can be applied from a materialist psychological perspective. You have to have any spiritual bone in your body, really. You could look at a lot of the things more as conceptual tools for materialist psychological approaches, and I believe they would still be effective. But anyway, that's an aside on my part. And so Nicole talks about the digestion of food, and obviously that is a biological function that just happens. We eat food, we digest. When we get to impressions, the experiences of life, Nicole makes a sharp distinction here. Nicole writes that while we can digest impressions, and we should digest our impressions, again, impressions being our experiences, the things that we see and feel, and just our experiences of life. But it does not happen naturally because it's not needed for survival. A human being can go through their entire life without ever achieving the digestion of their experiences and impressions, and it won't matter one bit. It won't matter one bit in the purely biological sense, that you can live and die without it. It's not needed. We do not begin digestion until we experience the first conscious shock, which Nicole obviously is applying specifically to the fourth way. But as I like to add, I love the fourth way. I love Nicole's writing. I love Ouspensky. I love all this stuff, and it's the spiritual, and that term spiritual. It's the spiritual school that I've spent the most time seriously studying, so I feel comfortable with it. But I always like to add that I'm not like a dogmatic fourth way devotee. Like it's part of my broader worldview, my broader spiritual approach, my broader psychological approach. It's my broader approach to living. And so I just like to add that, because I think that people thinking that to study Ouspensky, Gurdjieff, Nicole, all this stuff, that to study it means you have to, like, quote unquote, become a fourth way member or something. Like, that's a misunderstanding, and you don't need to do. You can get a lot from it without officially joining any kind of organizations or anything. But anyway, that's an aside. The reason why I said that is because Nicole talks about the conscious shock of the fourth way. But I think this applies. This would apply whether or not your quote-unquote conscious shock comes directly through study of the fourth way. Anyway, the conscious shock is the moment when we realize our predicament on this planet, when we realize humanity's predicament on this planet, and when we begin to consciously work on ourselves. And what this means is, one day you wake up and you realize the utter futility of just consuming, sleeping, sex, food, work, sex, food, work. It's that moment that all seekers have experienced, right? It's that moment when Camus talked about this too. I believe, was it Sartre? No, it was Camus. Yeah, Camus talked about that moment when you're walking through life, and then all of a sudden you look up, and the utter absurdity of it all strikes you. You look around at the stoplights and the cars and all of it, just as the humming machinery of human existence, and it just strikes you how utterly meaningless it is, how trivial it, or how meaningless it appears, I should say, and how trivial it seems. And at that moment, if you decide to grab hold of that moment and start working on yourself, that's the first conscious shock. And now Nicole says that first conscious shock is when you finally begin the digestion of impressions. This is when you can begin to take in the experiences and the foodstuff of life and begin to convert it into fuel for higher centers within your being and for higher awareness. But it's not natural. It doesn't have to happen, and the vast majority of people will never experience it. The vast majority of people will just mechanically go through life. You have that growth of essence when you're young, but then for the vast majority of the rest of our lives, we're just cultivating personality. Personality is essential, and I'm saying this, Nicole, I agree, but this isn't just my thoughts. Nicole stresses that we need to develop our personality. Our personality is a lot of people in the spiritual community now would call it ego. It's the self that we develop to deal with the world around us, and it's essential. It's needed, but the thing is, it's largely false, and it conceals our essence. And there comes a point where it's not enough. And we have to make the choice to start working again on our essence. It has to be conscious. It doesn't just happen naturally. And so, that first conscious shock is when we realize our predicament and decide to start working on ourselves and to undertake every day of our lives as an opportunity to work on ourselves. There's all I don't know if there's any literature fans out there, but I read this great book by a guy named Merlin Bowen, The Long Adventures of the how can I not remember the title? But it's about the writings. Bowen was a professor of English and a professor of literature, in the book was about the writings of Melville, and goes a lot into Moby Dick, but it covers all of Melville's major writings. And he discussed in there as well. It's actually interesting. I'm curious to know if he read any Gurdjieff or Ouspensky or anything like that. He definitely seemed like a seeker to me. It's my favorite book of literary criticism. It's a really beautifully. It's a work of philosophy that uses discussions of Melville as its conduit to get through to you. But he talks in there about this this quest to take on the perfection, or at least the understanding, the full and deep understanding of ourselves as a mission in our lives, and living every day, not just being thrown about by the events, but trying to use those events to come to a deeper understanding of who and what we are. But anyway, I'm sorry for that aside. Sorry to use your time. It's just Merlin Bowen, man. It's a great book. I need to do a whole series on that book someday, because left a great impression on me. If I could study under one person ever, I would have loved to have taken a class with Merlin Bowen. But anyway, so getting back to Maurice Nicole and the digestion. And so once we undertake this conscious shock, life begins to come at us differently. Although this is always conscious, the work, as discussed by Nicole, is always conscious, right? You start developing this magnetic center, and you develop a kind of internal momentum once you have this first conscious shock. But it's not something where you get to just sit back in the passenger seat. It's always a conscious work, which is probably what scares a lot of people away from it. There's no easy answers here. But once we do have that conscious shock, we do begin the digestive process, which means that we can begin taking in the impressions and resolving them differently. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I could keep talking all day. So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's an interesting concept. And I think it's a very good way to get a visceral grasp on Nicole's teachings, but also on life in general. If you think of your mind and your spirit and your being as a giant stomach, and these impressions that you're taking in are not just things that happen and disappear. It's like a substance that comes into your being, and you can digest it. You can transform it into something better, or you cannot. Right? You can continue to go through life robotically, and that's your choice. Right? Was in the Matrix. That's when you take the blue pill. You can take the blue pill, right? But if you choose to take the red pill, well, then you initiate that digestive process, and then the impressions that come at you are so much more than just meaningless flags flapping in the wind that disappear the second they're out of sight, right? They become something that comes inside of you, and you digest it, and you make it part of yourself, and you transform it into something better, take you to a higher place, make you a better person. And I don't mean better person just in the sense of like the Tony Robbins self-improvement sense. Now, there's definitely nothing wrong with that. I'm actually quite a big fan of Tony Robbins and of that kind of self-improvement. But the fourth way is going so much deeper than that. It's so much deeper. And anyway, that's about it, my friends. Digestion, interesting concept. I hope you're all doing well. Peace out, peace out, peace out.